Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, the Jackson County Board of Commissioners. Today is our work session, September the 14th, 2021. Appreciate everyone in attendance. We got some good items on the agenda today to review. I'll just, for the sake of letting everyone know, Commissioner Stribling is joining us via Zoom. So he is not present here in the boardroom, but he is participating via Zoom. And at this moment, Commissioner Dietz is on his way. He had another meeting and is concluding that one, and then we'll be here momentarily. But we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'll recognize our county manager, Mr. Don Adams, to go ahead and start today's discussions, which, as a reminder, today is a work session. This is just for us to have presentations to the board to sort of introduce topics and give us an opportunity to start the research process before we ultimately make a decision whether to put an item on the agenda for a vote in the future or not. So with that being said, Mr. Adams.
Yes, sir. The first item of discussion is in regards to the indoor pool project. We do have Clark Nexon here, Mr. Chad Roberson, and we also have other architects and staff online from Clark Nexon. We do have Rusty Ellis, our recreation director here, and I know this topic has kind of gone off the radar for a few months, but there has been a lot of work that's being done and it's been accomplished. We're at a point now to really start proceeding towards construction documents, but prior to proceeding towards construction documents, and when I say construction document, we've been in a planning schematic phase point of this process. The next phase of this is truly putting together bid documents. And if you've ever seen a full set of plans, ultimately that's what the architect firm along with the engineers will start working on in the next set of months. So before we proceeded forward, I'd ask Clark Nexon and for Mr. Ellis and for them to just come to the board and give presentation to the board to update you where we're at, and basically just to see if there's any input or questions in regards to the process. So having said that, I'll recognize Chad.
The attachment first or
The PowerPoint.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Good to see everyone. It's nice to be in person.
Yes.
Even though we're masked, I guess, can I take this off? You can. Okay, great, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you guys today. Yeah. Just make sure this is, there we go. So as Don mentioned, we're in the design development portion of the project. So we're about halfway through the design process, and we're really getting ready to move into the construction document phase of it. And thought it'd be a wonderful time to update you guys and show you the exciting work that has happened over the last few months. You know, when we got together many months ago during the advanced planning phase, this is actually before the bond had gone out, we had worked closely with your staff and to help come up with an idea about this building. We'd like to tell a story with our projects and especially wanted to relate to our community that we're working into. And some of the ideas that came from those conversations were dynamic, joyful, natural, relationships to the exterior and to the outside, creating environments that encourage those types of spaces. We also start to think about the water, and it's such a great element when you do these projects. And waves were one of the first things that really came to mind. And could the two pools, the competition pool and the leisure pool, could those start to really dynamically connect to one another? Can we start to tell a story about that? There's some really interesting images. Just the image that you see of the wave right now is there's some transparency that you can see through those waves. How can we start to take these kind of ephemeral ideas and turn those into buildings and architecture? And one of those was the idea of the concept wave. So as we start to translate that into buildings, how does these ideas turn into buildings? We have those two great elements, the competition pool and leisure pool. And how can we join those two together, whether it's with transparency views between those two areas? And you'll see some of these ideas that we started with start to really be realized in the project. One of the other things that we're fortunate to have is this beautiful environment that we have around Western North Carolina. The idea of how water kind of moves in between those rocks in the streams started to inspire us as we were working on the project. As we started to translate this into the architecture for the building, the roof planes, bringing wood into this conversation about how the building should look, and then also the transparencies of the wall and the glazing, all of that really starts to inform what the buildings are going to look like. So that being said, here's where we start to really look at the architecture and the buildings. And I'll just kind of walk you guys through. This is the overall site plan. We're high up on the mountain, kind of looking back toward the existing facility. And
It looks like it's foggy though.
it's a little foggy, it always is in August. That's right. It is. If I can orient you guys, this is the existing building. It's the green area over here, and unfortunately you guys can't see my later pointer, but the existing building is with the green space, and then the drop-off lane is something that then the drop-off lane is something that we've introduced into this area as part of the conversations with staff, and really to create a new front door into the facility here. The aquatics addition is over to the right, and then the two pools, the competition pool is the first one, and then the leisure pool is more to in those areas. As we zoom into the floor plan a little bit, the existing recreation center is over on the left. It's kind of the hatched areas in that space. The new entrance that we were talking about is in this location, and then the aquatics components are all of those areas to the right. And I'll zoom in on this plan a little bit more. So working from the main entrance is on the lower portion of the site. Lower portion of this drawing is there's a covered entrance, and we're going to look at this. Can you guys see that?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So the covered entrance, there's an outdoor area right there. So imagine, you need to be picked up by your parents. You got a place to sit outside in that location. As you come through the vestibule area right there, there's a large lobby space. As we were working on other aquatics projects, this lobby space really becomes active. And so we created enough space there where folks could come into that area. If you have a swim meet, there's enough overflow in that space. Right as you come in the door, the reception area is located right there. That'll be your check-in point. That also serves as the check-in point to the existing portion of the building. So they're able to staff that with one person, be able to kind of look down the existing corridor and also be able to address people as they're coming in to the new facility. Just behind that reception area is the concession space. And then over to the right is what we refer to as the dry side that takes you around the corridor and then into the locker rooms, into those spaces. There's the women's locker room, which is first. And remember those rocks that we saw in the middle of the stream, your circulation pattern through these locker rooms is almost like that water kind of flowing through there. We ease the corners as you were walking through the locker room spaces. There's a sauna in both the male and the female bathroom areas right there. And then obviously changing areas and showers and all of that stuff. So you can actually enter from the pools from each one of the locker rooms. So the competition pool is the first pool that you can enter. One thing to note about the competition pool is if you're a parent and you're coming to watch a swim meet, you don't have to go through the locker room area. You actually have direct access from the public space into those areas. There's some spectator seating just to the planned south of the competition pool. And we have a 6-lane, 25-yard pool in there with a diving well as part of this as well. And also, we've incorporated a climbing wall. When we have that much depth and a water, water that deep, we can take the opportunity to put the climbing wall in. That seems to be a lot of fun for folks to utilize. It's actually like transparent. You can see through it, but you can climb up and fall back into the water. So it's a lot of fun in that area. And then separating the competition pool from the leisure pool as some of those ideas we were talking about as far as transparency, being able to see what's going on in the leisure pool area and really see a lot of activity and dynamic activity. So as you enter into the leisure pool, the first thing you come to is the splash pad area. So you'll have a splash pad, really zero entry in that area, great for the younger kids. And then Throughout the leisure pool area, there's a number of different items that we've incorporated into it. The round area is a vortex. It's great for therapy. It's great for, practicing aquatics exercises inside of those areas. And then other areas throughout there, volleyball, basketball, all of those things that you incorporate into to those spaces. There's a lot of back of the house components in an aquatics project. So the mechanical area is really that kind of quarter of the building up to the upper right. And then two other components that we've incorporated into it are the party rooms. And I think of all the aquatics projects that we've worked on, the party rooms are one of the biggest hits. Parents can come out there, have the birthday parties. This one's set up so that you could subdivide it into two rooms if you wanted to have two parties going on at one time, or if you had a large, you could open up the wall in between those two and have one large party. Those areas. I'll pause right here for just a second before we start to look at the renderings and see if there are any questions on the floor plans or
Capacity for the party rooms.
I'm sorry.
Capacity for the party rooms.
We're probably about 15 in each one of those, 15 to 20 in each one. So if you had a big one, you could probably fit 30, 35 kids in there at one time. So
In the depths of the various areas of the pool of the water, if you just touch on.
sure, on the competition pool will be 3.5 feet on the shallow end, and then 12 feet on the deep end in that area. And then on the leisure pool would be 0 entry to 4 feet will be the maximum depths.
And you said there were 6 lanes?
6 lanes,
Yeah.
25 yards.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
I don't know, remember who I was talking to. I think it was at the state conference. And someone was telling me that they had a pool built and they only had 4 lanes and that really wasn't enough. So I'm pleased to see that there's more.
Most of the competition pools that we've been doing recently have been 6 lanes.
6.
Seems to work pretty well for the high school meets.
Yeah.
They went to a larger pool, they wind up having 1 or 2 lanes that are empty, and that the water is expensive. When you're
Sure.
building those pools, so.
The only other question or point I would make is, and I know this probably not as important with this facility as would be if we were designing an office complex where there's different types of functions other than this kind of recreational function. But, we are in the days of COVID, and this is the perfect opportunity to make sure that we're doing everything we can to minimize contact between people, touchless. The way we open doors, the way all this comes into context now that we probably wouldn't have thought of 2 years ago.
That's a great point. I mean, the plan that we have as we're going into the construction documents, front door entry, obviously, handicap accessible, automatic opening doors in there. And then conversations about hand washing, whether you use sensors in those areas, that generally is what we're doing. Same thing with toilet flushing and urinals, all that stuff. So those are things that we define during the construction document process, but absolutely great point. One other good thing about a modern aquatics facility is the amount of outdoor air that you're getting into those facilities. Much, much different than what folks have experienced before. That chlorine smell goes away because of the type of facility that we're putting in there, and then the number of changes of air that we're bringing in there is also much higher.
We did be able to have those energy saving lights that come on when somebody enters the locker room, and then when there's nobody in there, it
Yes.
goes off.
Yeah, we'll have
Okay.
occupancy sensors in
That's
those. In fact, most of the spaces will have an occupancy sensor in there.
That saves a lot.
Yeah, and then all LED fixtures inside the facility.
There'll be security cameras.
Yes, in fact, we just had a meeting with Rusty about that last week. So, yeah.
That's
So I'll jump a little bit further into the presentation. We've actually, Adam and Dorothea are on here as well. Adam's actually going to walk you through some of these spaces virtually. So that's why we're doing that. But I wanted to orient you guys. So this is the main entry that we've created. So just in front of the existing facility right now, part of that area that we were talking about is a drop-off. those ideas of transparency and really trying to open it up so that it feels very public and welcoming in that area. The main lobby space that's covered with the sloped roof right there is very open and welcoming as you come into that space. We've looked at different types of materials so that they are complementary to the existing facility, using a gray brick and then some wood to be incorporated on the exterior of the building so that it complements the existing facilities out there. And then some metal siding over the mechanical yards in the back. And that, as I mentioned, they pools have a tremendous amount of mechanical equipment, a lot of in and out of chemicals coming in there, so we try to mask those areas. This is looking on the field side of the facility, and the transparency that we have in this elevation here really starts to reflect those ideas of the waves that we were talking about earlier. Really want to bring the outside in to this facility so that in the summertime, wintertime, I mean, imagine being in this facility when it's snowing outside. I mean, that would be really awesome to be in that area, but trying to make that facade just as transparent as it possibly could, but also incorporating it into the existing facility. And then moving into the competition pool, we have handicap accessible ramp is what you see in the foreground, as long as the spectator seating. Incorporated wood structure above the competition pool area. And then again, the 6 lanes, diving blocks are on the far end, and then the climbing wall is right there in that location. And then creating some windows in between the leisure pool area and the competition pool so you can see what's going on. Scoreboard is up on the right hand side so that the scoring can be done automatically as you're doing the meets in that space. And then moving into the leisure pool area, just a bunch of different types of activities taking place in there, whether it's volleyball or basketball or even the vortex area. There's lots of different types of activities, different programs that can take place, whether it's swimming lessons or the therapy that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to pause right here, and I think if we can change it over to Adam, I'll walk you guys through it, and I'll kind of narrate you with where we are. Adam, no pressure here.
Let's see. Okay, are y'all seeing the screen?
Yes.
Get my face out of there. Okay.
The view that we were looking at earlier, we're up above the center, kind of hanging up on top of the mountain. And now Adam's going to kind of walk us through.
The sun's come out and the fog is just like.
That's right. So it may be a little bit slow just because it's processing across the internet, but we're getting much closer to the entry into the building. And we reorganized the parking area so that we could take, those spaces out there are tremendously wide. So we're able to capture some additional spaces, plus put some of the landscaping and parking lot seating, or parking lot landscaping that would be necessary to meet design requirements. So we're standing above the front entry right now. I'll see a little low curb drop off area right there, so folks can swing in there. If it's somebody that has an injury, they can get out of the car much easier. Walking through the main entry space right here, real open and transparent in this area. Main reception desk in this location where folks would come in. You know, part of the conversation has been having some sort of TV display or something in there that tells folks what's going on. Just kind of looking back out towards the main entry, and then been able to look down that corridor that is the existing building. This is a little lobby seating area for indoor inside the space. Folks need to wait or just gather, have a cup of coffee before you work out or swim. Also serves as a great location during a swim meet where folks can sit there and wait for their kids. Having kids that have swim, you got that 30 seconds that they're going to be on. So you need a place to hang out for a while before
A lot of waiting.
it is. Don't check your email while while they're doing that. You'll miss their meet. So now you're looking, the reception area is back to the left. You're looking through into the competition pool in this location. So we're going into the competition pool in that area. Concession stand over to the left. Then this one walking toward the dry side of the facility. We do have some toilet rooms that are services for the public in that space, so you don't have to go into the locker rooms in order to use the restroom if there's an event going on. Security wise, we've got it set up so that you can close off access to the pools. And we've talked a lot about how to manage that, whether it's key fobs or swipe cards or things like that, and we'll get into that deeper. Yes, sir.
Mr. Robertson, is the competition pool large enough for a water polo set up?
I'll have to check on that. I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly find out for you.
Something that maybe.
I think that pool is probably about the same size as three. I'm pretty sure we can accommodate it. Anything might be a little bit smaller, but still accommodate.
Another activity to
Yeah.
incorporate.
And I'll check on that. I don't know right off the bat what those dimensions are, but we can certainly check on that. So, this is the dry corridor here. Also have it open to the outside so that we can get some natural light in here, but also give some privacy. Locker rooms are kind of accentuated with tile in that area so that you know which one of those locker rooms that you would be going into. We put some softness and kind of curves into the wall so that it felt like those waves as we were talking about earlier. Walking into the bathroom areas, over on the left is a sauna space, and then as we kind of meander through those areas, we've set up some changing areas that have privacy in there as opposed to kind of the traditional big open locker room space there. There are some open areas with locker spaces that folks could change and just put their clothes and personal belongings away. Also have a family changing area outside of those areas as well. Now we're walking through into the competition pool area. Competition pool is separated for safety purposes, so that you come out of the locker room and there's still a little bit of a gap in between those areas. So if somebody gets away from you, you got a chance to grab them before they run into the next pool. But competition pool over there. And now we're walking towards the leisure pool. Just kind of looking back into the competition pool area right there.
Where's the rock climbing, the
It's
wall climbing?
over on the right-hand side. Adam, maybe,
Oh,
yeah, right there. Yep.
oh, okay.
So it kind of looks like it's a big plexiglass
A
plane, and then it has the
plexiglass.
grips on it.
Yeah.
And we did one of those for Watauga, and I think that's one of their favorite parts of the project.
Can it be moved?
No, it's fixed.
I see.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
that'd be
fixed.
safer.
Yeah, yeah. It's fixed. So handicap accessibility along this ramp. That ramp is also a great location for exercises, and it tends to work in more than just a capacity for accessibility into the pools. We have the diving blocks on this end, but we also have a diving board. Nice thing about the diving board is you can flip it up. So if you're having a competition going on, the diving board flips up out of the way, or you can flip it back down. going into the leisure pool area. And over to the left is the vortex space, so that water will actually swirl in there and give you some resistance as you're exercising in that space. And then set up for volleyball and then basketball in those two areas. And there's a stair entry right there, but then up to this side is where you're seeing the play features and the splash pads in those areas. Some of the things that we were trying to do was incorporate that mountain feel to it, so that it felt more like a waterfall into those areas. We'll certainly develop that as we get deeper into the design process. We're looking back at the party rooms right now. Party rooms kind of oversee that area into the leisure pool. Works really well if you're having a party for the younger kids in that space. They got them confined into the leisure pool areas in that location. And also trying to create some relationship to the exterior on this side. So you'll be able to sit in here and actually look out across the ball fields in the background. A lot of times we'll put, in this example here, is some benches along the edge. Parents need a place to sit or hang out. We've got that opportunity within that space. Going out that space just outside the competition pool and the leisure pool, give folks an opportunity to go outside of that area. This is set up so that we can still confine people and not create a security access point into the center, and also make sure everybody's going through the appropriate channels at the front door. But it does give folks a place to hang out outside, have a picnic. As far as we get to furniture in those areas, we can certainly look at different types of lounge chairs or seating areas outside there. But now we're outside the picnic areas, just down plant south of us, and really try to develop this whole area so that the new aquatics facility and some of the existing amenities that you have on site can really work together. The picnic shelter, different pathways, facility. And we're looking, the ball fields are behind us right here. We're looking back toward the leisure pool areas. Looking underneath the splash pad areas there. We have mechanical equipment that we're mounting on the roof, and also screening that so it's not being seen as visibly from the ball fields. This is the business side of the facility with all the mechanical equipment that's in that area, and we're screening that as well, and also making it so that it's easy access for delivery of chemicals and any other equipment that needs to come in and out of the facility. Back to the front door. Includes kind of the walk around of the building there. I'll pause again to see if there are any questions. Wouldn't mind flipping me back to the PowerPoint.
Is there yeah.
Hey, Adam. If you
Yes.
don't stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can just barely hear you. Commissioner Scribbin, are you there?
Mr. Chairman?
You must have a bad connection. I can just barely hear you.
That's good old Verizon.
So the next steps in the process and kind of the schedule moving forward, construction documents are scheduled to be complete in April of 2022. There'll be a period where we have to submit the Department of Insurance for their review on the project, and then they'll give us comments with a bidding period of May to June of 2022. And the contracts and final negotiations on the construction with it beginning in June or July of 22. The construction is scheduled to be complete at the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, depending on what kind of weather we get out here. We have the color week factor out here we have to deal with as well. So that's where we are in the process. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions about what we're doing, next steps moving forward. Or I will have to say there's been a lot of participation from Rusty and his staff, and it's been great. I mean, they're fantastic to work with. They provided us a lot of input to make the building much more user friendly. I believe their needs from an operational standpoint. Their needs operational.
Is there comment? Environment. I mean, I know it's a tough question, but it's something we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, it right now is terrible. I mean, just to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, it's escalation from last year has been between about 25% escalation that we saw in 1 year. Typically, we'll see 5 to 8% in a year. There's a lot of procurement issues right now. Roofing is really difficult to get a hold of. Single ply membrane roofing is very difficult to get a hold of. A lot of manufacturers are not guaranteeing delivery, and they're not guaranteeing a price until they get ready to deliver. Our hope and the way things tend to be trending is in the springtime, it will calm down a little bit when some of these procurement issues start to settle down. Folks are hopefully back to work and they can produce and manufacture the materials in a better way.
So at that time, we will go through a cost estimating process.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah.
So in the spring, there will be additional numbers provided.
That's right. And right now, we're finishing up the cost estimate for the design development package. We'll look at that, see where things are relative to the current market, and then we'll do it again at the end of the construction documents. So we understand where those are. When we started the design development process, lumber was, I can't remember exactly the numbers, like $1,400 a board foot or 1,000 board feet. Now it's down to 700s now. So it's the commodity market. So it's hopeful that things will change as springtime comes around. But we'll definitely keep you informed as we're going through that process.
Can y'all hear me now?
Thank you guys very much. Again, I'm happy to answer any other questions. Sir.
Thank you. You ready? Yes. Are you ready? Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for inviting me back so soon. I guess I didn't wear out my welcome the other night, so I appreciate the invitation to come back and talk about a couple of different things. First thing I wanted to talk to you about is the 2020 census data started to trickle down to the local level to where we can kind of take a look at some of this. We are getting more of it. It's getting refined as the state demographer's office also has more time to work through some of this. We wanted to bring you back to some initial data captures and what that means for us locally. Want to remind you that in 2019, we started preparing for the 2020 census, and we talked about how we're going to promote it and things that we're going to do, and we worked on that. And the kickoff date was the beginning of March, where people could begin to self-report the census. And then 2 weeks later, we started having to shut everything down with the pandemic. So it was not the ideal conditions to try to hold census process. But we continue to work through that. The planning staff worked with our partners in the media, with WRGC, with the Silver Herald, Allison Outdoor, a lot of partners in the community, including our different departments, Public Health, Department on Aging. Western Carolina University was a big help in a lot of different ways during this process. We made use of social media, and we even went out and held out some pop-up events where we bring iPads out and you could fill out the census on the iPad while we were out there, which only took about 5 or 10 minutes to complete. We also partnered with Dogwood Trust, and a couple things we did with them. They gave us a grant to create banners for all of our SRC locations to help encourage local level participation. They also did an incentive program for local governments of counties that were, if they could improve on their 2010 self-reporting numbers, they would grant initial $5,000 and $2,000 for each point you got above that percentage point. I think Darlene may be correct, but I think we got around $24,000 from them in that program. So we have that grant money still to be used for mainly for I think the rules of that grant had to be for a program that was in line with Dogwood's mission, and I don't believe you could use it to support terrorism. I think those are the two basic goalposts we have to meet with that, so that money's still available for communities. Back to the numbers. The biggest one is 43,109. That's the population number. Growth rate of 7% increase for Jackson County. You can break that down in the demographic data of based on race. I think much with what consistent with what you've heard nationally. Our percentage of white alone population remained pretty much flat, and I think that's the first time since we started doing the census that has happened nationally, and we see that happening to some extent locally. Some of that is also on how we report. So there's a change in how you could report. You could report as having more than one ethnicity. So that does impact some of this information, but it's still a broader point to make. The other one that I would mention, the two that are also percentage-wise large increases in our Hispanic population and in our Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific population has also increased the most in this area. Percentage-wise, the numbers are still clearly Jackson County remains a primarily Caucasian county in total population numbers. The group quarter information, the 2020 census breaks it down a little bit better than the 2010 census did. The biggest determinant of group quarter population is Western Carolina University because of the dorms. I think a couple things happened here. In 2010, there was a lot of self-reporting in the dorm level, so you as a student would have to kind of self-report those numbers a little bit more. In 2020, they allowed the university to report those numbers, so I think you probably have a more accurate on-campus count in 2020 than you did in 2010. The downside to the college impact is I don't know that we captured it totally in that 43,109, and here's why. Because there's a significant number, as you know, of college students that live off campus in Jackson County. We did work with the university, and they did a great job of finding everybody that lived off campus, what they're, and providing that information to the Census Bureau. We initially thought in our earlier conversations that they would, much like the group quarter count, they would just transfer those students and count them in Jackson County. However, along further conversation, what the Census Bureau told us was that they would not do that like they did the group quarter count. They would still, that student, that person would still have to report. And the only thing that they would do with that information is if for some reason they reported in their county where their parents lived or where they're from, they would be able to cross-reference the two lists and assign those people back to Jackson County. At this time, I wouldn't be able to tell you what percentage of that happened, and I don't know that the Census Bureau would ever release that type of granular data to us. I don't know if we'll know how effective that was, but Western took a lot of work, but they did put together that list, and we're thankful for that because it didn't hurt us in having that information and probably most likely helped us. Housing units, in talking with the building and inspections department, I I don't know how accurate these numbers are. We'll have to dig a little bit deeper into it. We show a growth of only 701 units between 2010 and 2020. With our multifamily housing in Cullowhee alone, I think we would far exceeded that number. So I don't know exactly how this number got derived. We'll have to dig deeper into that, but that number seems low to me in looking at the data based on our information. And the township data, this is just to give you an understanding. I could have done census tracts, but those are really big. I think the township data kind of gives everyone an understanding of what areas of the county we're really speaking about. And for the most part, we had the largest area of growth is in Hamburg Township percentage-wise and Cashers. So those are two areas that we've typically seen more seasonal type of growth, but this time we're seeing more counted in those areas. And Cullowhee Township continues to be our largest township, again, with the inclusion of the university and their impact. That's not a big surprise. I'll stop there and try and ask if there's any questions or anything else I can offer the board.
What do you think?
No,
What's the student population numbers at Western? 14,000?
I think I want to say it's around 12. I don't know what their census, they haven't had their census data this year yet, I don't
it's a
believe.
little down from last year. I was at a meeting and the chancellor said the enrollment was, last year was 11,000 plus.
Yeah.
And this year it's right at 11,000.
So we've got about 5,000 to 6,000 students not in these numbers, or at least we.
No, well, I don't know what the percentage is. There'll be some students that were actually captured.
Yes.
Again, so, we tried to capture students, if they stayed in town, but when the pandemic hit and they closed down, if the student left their apartment, even when the door knockers came or the folks came they may not have been there in place. And so, again, this, I think had we rolled out in a normal census year, we probably would have captured that number better this year, this go around. I think the pandemic certainly sent a lot of people, there were a lot more complications were introduced to the process, not just for us, but for everybody. But certainly in our situation where you have a population that's, that should be counted here because this is where they were on April 1st, but you just don't know how that translated or if they even reported it all.
Well,
And
and some
hard to
of
track
the, when you look at the population, the enrollment at Western, that includes graduate students, online
Mhm.
students,
Yeah.
students in Asheville at the extension program. So they may not all live in Jackson County. People from Macon County drive to Western every day, but they would be counted as residents of Macon County. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the services that those X number of thousand students
Oh,
put on the county,
Well,
in the
that's-
sheriff's office.
Yeah.
That's, I forget how many, for every 2,000 students you have need for one sheriff's deputy, something of that nature, what impact that might have. Is there any data on why the Cashers had increased 25% on the population in Hamburg 18? Any way to?
I don't know if you can, so the census, the limitation of the census would be, we're relying on you to assign yourself to where you belong. So it could just be that folks are maybe moving here, and if they were part-time residents in 2010, let's say, that they may be reporting as full-time residents now, or there just may be more people that have come over the last 10 years that are choosing to stay at least long enough that they would consider Jackson County to be their full-time residency. So that's probably more of what you're seeing. I don't know that we'll ever get down to the granular level of understanding. Besides anecdotally, I don't think there's going to be statistical information that's going to lead us to say this is the exact reason why these areas grew. I think if you extrapolate that, it's going to be that more people are coming in to southern Jackson County and choosing to make that their primary residence.
In 2000 to 2010, Jackson County grew almost 25% in the population.
in cash.
County.
And I think that's a couple things. I think what you see is we did a much better job reporting in 2010 than we did in 2000.
2000 to 2010.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay.
And I think there's some reasons for that. If you look at it, we did a much better job of reporting out, and the Census Bureau did a much better job of outreach between the years 2000 and 2010. So it could be a mixture a surge in growth at the university and in the county, coupled with a better effort from the federal government to provide local governments resources to make outreach to those folks and understand the importance of why being involved in the census is beneficial.
Vacant housing units, is that determined by if it's vacant when they come to count? Would these be part-time residents?
Sure. So they could be multiple. So vacant units include seasonal homes. If you don't live in that, if
Okay.
you're not there 6 months out of the year, don't claim that as your primary residence, or there's nobody there, or they find out through interview process that that's not your primary residence, then they count that as vacant. So
Okay.
seasonally vacant comes out with that too.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
you all have the ones that are just that they're vacant, that they can't find any signs of habitation.
Thank you.
I saw a presentation a couple of years back, 2 or 3 years back, from a demographer from UNC. And she talked about we had reached the point in our state's history where deaths now outnumber births. And that the only growth that's occurring in North Carolina is through in-migration from other areas. Is those, and I know that's not displayed here, these are just real basic raw numbers, but do we know yet any of how that trend, if that trend is where we are in Jackson County compared to that trend?
Yeah, I don't know that we have that level of data at this point. We can continue to work through in-migration versus, because you have to calculate the death rate versus the birth rate, and then kind of get all that information in, and that number change, obviously changes. So we'll have to wait for them to kind of release, I think, some more data before we can kind of extrapolate some of that information
Because
out.
if you just look at the number, if you just look at the numbers, if you'll scroll back down a little. Another way, yeah. You just look at the numbers in general. I mean, the fact that we increased 2,838, I mean, here is a huge assumption. The Hispanic increase, the other race increase. I mean, that could be births, and that could be in migration too.
Sure.
When you only have an increase of 5 among the white alone population, there could have been a lot of deaths.
Correct. I think there's I think you could attribute that to that. I wouldn't be able to tell you based on the numbers that we have just yet as to, if that is an assumption that is supported by the data, or if there's another factor that comes into that.
I know the health department keeps that obviously record of births and deaths for the whole county, so we could just look at that.
Right.
But it
That's a
changes.
good question.
It is, and
Very
I was
interesting. Yeah.
shocked when I saw that presentation, because according to what she was presenting, I mean, they run the numbers and using different formulas and looking at it different ways, and there was no change in that path that we're on. There is no way to alter the course of where we're headed.
I think it's safe to say that in 2020, Jackson County finds itself in a more diverse place than it did in 2010.
And much older.
And much older, and we get into that, and as the census data comes out, like I said, they came out with some, the numbers late August here, so it's not, we've not had a lot of time to really sink in and get to into the depths of that information. But we did want to bring you some just basic facts that we've extrapolated, and we will continue to work on that to shed more light about why we think some of these things and trends occurring.
Well, and I think in regarding some of our concerns about workforce, this has implications, because if the people moving in are retired and staying longer, say in Cashiers or Amber, Glenville area, they're not contributing to the workforce. I mean, I'm not saying they're not contributing. I don't want anyone listening to me thinking that I don't think they contribute in positive ways. But if they're retired, they're not working jobs. And we have needs for workers, as most counties in the United States have.
I think
So,
I would just be careful trying to extrapolate too much information based on this data set about what this means, because I think the other thing that's changed here in the last 3 or 4 years is your ability to work from home and be remote. And I think that could change how some people choose to work. You know,
That's true.
they may be working in
Yes.
other areas, but choosing to live in Jackson County, and that can certainly be, could certainly be attributed to some of that growth. But I would just caution we don't want to make too broad of statements other than to say what we really mean to say is that Jackson County is continuing to grow. We're seeing some growth in the southern end of the county of a more permanent, of a more year-round population, and that we still see that there's an impact from students at Western Carolina University on the county. I think those are all good broad statements. I think as we try to ask questions a little bit more granular, we'll have to get the data a little bit more granular to answer and make some educated guesses that would be, I think that would be more impactful and meaningful.
There is a trend in, throughout the county, particularly in the Casters area, of homeowners associations, putting in their fiber optic and allow, I've heard
Right.
people complain about the cost sharing of each homeowner having to pay this year. But that's going to allow more and more people to work at home and move to our community.
Yes, that's great.
If there are no other questions about that, I'll kind of try to roll right into the next part of my presentation, which I think we've discussed over the past 18 months to 2 years in bits and pieces about the state of North Carolina and some of the changes that they're making. It's on the desktop.
I know.
Okay. So, about statutory changes that are going to impact Jackson County's Unified Development Ordinance and things that we have to do to talk about that. What I thought I'd start with is just a brief overview of the Unified Development Ordinance, because I think that Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Stribling weren't here as we were going through that process. So just wanted to kind of just remind everybody why we got to Unified Development Ordinance, and then we can kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of what we've got to, what we're trying to accomplish with these amendments. So the amendments that I'm going to discuss are bringing them to you as a package so that we have to come to you successional times. But we have some associated amendments we want the board to consider, would ask the board to consider along with the 160D changes. But first, just UDO background. Prior to us adopting the UDO in 2019, Jackson County had about 20-21 ordinances, depending on how you classify a planning board ordinance. But these are the ordinances that we administered, all standalone ordinances developed somewhere between the early 90s all the way up into the mid 2000s. And the problem that you get when you have standalone ordinances in such a high number that are written over a course of 25 years is that you get a lot of inconsistencies in the language, because you do one in 1990 with a certain group of folks and a certain set of laws, and then you just keep multiplying that, and none of them talk to each other. And if you ever try to administer those evenly across the county over time, you're doing one of two things. You're constantly updating ordinances and amendments, which you should always do anyway. But when you're dealing with 1, 2, 3, those are usually pretty easy to manage. When you get up into the double digits and get closer to 20, it really makes for a difficult time for anybody to maintain those documents in a way that will be effective and sustainable over time. Jackson County started off by just addressing the issues that were important to the county at the time, which is not a bad way of approaching it. But when you get all these issues together, you tend to need a common document to bring all of that together, where the regulations are still the same, but you can combine administration processes and items that are common to each ordinance over time. So what is a Unified Development Ordinance? A UDO is what we call a framework document. It doesn't, for instance, if you had a bad ordinance or a group of bad ordinances, or you thought that the language was bad, the UDO doesn't, combining them into one document doesn't change that. Combining it into one document just gives you one document to have to work through, not 3, or in our case, 20. So the UDO is a framework. It's just reformatting everything into one document which is more manageable in a lot of respects. So we wanted to consolidate our land development regulations into one document. So that's what we did. That's what the UDO was designed to accomplish. And what becomes the common elements of all those ordinances we talked about? Administration, processes, how do you get a zoning permit, how do you get a special use permit, everything that we talk about in processes happens here. Enforcement, how do we enforce ordinances? Well, before we had 3 different time frames of how we enforced ordinances. That's kind of hard on staff to remember which time frame is which ordinance and under what conditions are we enforcing and how do we do that, because they were all just a little bit different. So one enforcement process now covers a majority of it. And then a common definition section. We had like 6 different definitions of the word lot, or parcel, or setback, or building line. And it wasn't that they were all at odds with each other, but which one do you pick? Which one do you use? We have commonality in definitions now. So that was really the background of what the UDO was designed to do. Bring all of our ordinances into one structure to be able to manage it and have a sustainable land development regulatory framework for years to come. So what's 160D and why do we need to amend the ordinance? Well, it comes to us from the state. And this is probably about now 8 years in the making. The state started talking about this in 2013 and 14 about modernizing the statutes that give local governments the authority to regulate land development and zoning. For counties, in the section was 153A. For cities, it was 160A. Those are they had a lot of commonalities between the two. There's a few distinctions, but the language left a lot of gray area between what authority counties had and what authorities cities had and how that all came about. So they combined this two statutes finally and into one new statute, 160D. For shorthand, we always call these the 160D amendments. So you'll hear that, reference that a lot. So that amendment process or that state statute change dictated that we needed to do a couple different things to make sure that our ordinance was in line with the new state statutes. So we reflected, the first thing is we had all 153A references in our ordinance structure. Well, that structure, or 153A for zoning purposes, no longer exists. So we had to change all those references to the appropriate reference in the new section. There's some additional regulatory language that we'll go through real quickly that we were required to adopt. In this process, we're recommending some additional amendments to clarify some existing policies, and there is one request from one planning council to add a use in one district that we just rolled into this process to prevent you guys from having another public hearing right on the back of this public hearing. The other question is why the UDO? Well, if we didn't have a UDO, to make all the changes that I'm talking about would have required roughly 28 public hearings across the county. For a frame of reference, a majority of the counties and cities that are going through this process will have 1 public hearing, possibly 2, depending on if you require a planning board. We would have had 28. So the UDO has shrunk that number down to 5. So we're still gonna have 5 public hearings, which will be 3 more than most other jurisdictions will have based on our setup. But we've already gone through 4 of those public hearings with 3 planning councils and the planning board, and I'll discuss that in a minute. And then this leads the Board of Commissioners to call for and hold a public hearing for consideration of adoption. So talk about updating the statute references 153 and 160 to 160D. The statute requires us to update some terminology. In the state, we use the word conditional use permit and special use permit interchangeably. The state got to the point where it said, well, that's pretty confusing across the whole state. Everybody's now going to refer to those as special use permits. So we've changed all that information in the document. Conditional zoning districts, there have been a couple different ways that towns and counties have referred to those. They just said standardize it. Anything that's conditional zoning district has to be called a conditional zoning district. So we're going to make some of those changes. Those are some examples. The statute's required that we add a conflict of interest statement for staff, appointed boards and elected boards. So we've added that language in there. It pretty much follows the conflict of interest statement that the board of commissioners already follows. It just makes it clear that it applies to staff and appointed boards as well. So we've made that change. We ensure that the definitions section, that they're consistent with state definitions, especially for buildings, dwellings, dwelling units, sleeping units. It doesn't say we have to adopt their definition specifically, it just can't be inconsistent. We've addressed that in our definition section, which basically says if for any reason our definition is different than the state's definition, we'll always use the state's definition as a default. We believe that will keep us in line with the state if their definition changes for any reason, and we're not able to make that change in the same time frame. There's some amendments to the subdivision regulations. Most of those deal with performance guarantees. Basically, the new language says the state allows 4 or 5 different types of guarantees. If the state allows it, we can't pick and choose which guarantees we allow. If it's allowed through state statute, just through the setup. So we can't say you can only give us a bond or you can only give us cash. We've got to allow the full menu. And then it also clarifies that performance guarantees are only there for the installation of the roadway or the water lines. It cannot be held in perpetuity and used for general maintenance and upkeep. That would not be allowed. That's never been an issue for Jackson County, but apparently that's been something that's been happened in other jurisdictions. They made some amendments to the vested rights portion of the ordinance, which is if I come in and get a development approval or I have a permit, I've got rights to if the rules change, I have a vested right to continue my development under the same rules I got it approved under. The biggest part of that change is that for all site-specific development approvals, like when you submit a plan, like special use permit plan to a board or council, you have at least 2 years of vested rights, and that's what we've gone to. It used to be 1 year, it's 2 years that we've changed it to be consistent. And the other, this is new, permit choice is a newer type of concept for the state. What that says is if I submit an application for a permit and we're either in the amendment process to change the rules about how that gets issued, if I've got the permit in hand before the rule changes, or I give it to the county before that, the developer or the applicant has the ability to choose which set of rules they're going to follow. So they can either follow the existing rules, or if it's more beneficial to follow the rules that are going to be in place after the change, they can choose that. That's nothing that staff has come up with. That comes down from the state. So we are in a position that we'll comply with that new rule and regulation. And the new statute also prohibits what they call third-party downzoning. So downzoning would be if I have a commercial piece of property and the neighbors got together, because anybody can potentially just ask for the commissioners to consider rezoning a piece of property. You don't necessarily have to be the property owner. A lot of times we see that developers have property that's contingent on the rezoning, so they'll be the applicant. So it's not that you don't have third parties that ask for rezonings, but for downzonings, if I have a commercial piece of property and the community got together and said, we want to apply to the county to make that residential, that can't happen without the property owner signing off on it anymore. Theoretically, it could happen. It's not been an issue for us, but that the state nevertheless requires that we prohibit that type of activity. And then finally, with the 160D portion, it's amendments to enforce or to the enforcement section. And really, this just specifies how we have to notice a violation, and how we issue it, and how it's to be delivered. So we've made those changes to comply with that section. And then the state requires us to standardize an appeal time frame, and it's 30 days, which we did have to make some changes. We had some appeal time frames that were 15 and some other things, so we made those changes as well. I'll stop there. That's the 160D portion. Are there any questions about kind of the state mandated types of changes? And we'll get you, I don't think you've gotten it yet. We just went through the planning board process last Thursday, but we will get you the actual red line of Angie, send that out, or get that to Angie, she can send that out, where you'll see all the strike throughs. But these are the concepts that you'll find in the ordinance.
I do have a question on that last slide. The state requires now 30 days. What if there's a violation, like we had, say, with the project in Millennial and Coley, and they were in violation and the erosion continues, if it continues raining and that kind of thing, if they appeal, then it could just continue to erode for 30 more days.
Yeah, and for the erosion control, that was already the case. So that wasn't a second, so it's always been a 30-day appeal process.
So we don't have any recourse to stop them.
So I think this is why, and you would hear Tony, I think would tell you the same thing I'm going to tell you, is that we spend a lot of time trying to work with property owners to voluntarily comply and applicants to voluntarily comply. Now with erosion control and things, we also put some other measures in place that would stop inspections, that would, we've also put in some stopgap measures for inspection processes that will help hopefully catch some of these potential issues before we get down to the point where we have to issue a notice of violation. This is only when you get to the point where you can't get the violation corrected, by just noting, hey, you've got a violation here, let's correct it. If they correct it, then we're not going down this path.
Good.
I think what we try to do, because we know there's a limitation, if we go in and say, hey, this is where it's at, we're going to issue a notice violation, there's no way around the fact they have the ability to appeal, and they have that time frame to appeal. So we try to work with property owners, and we're fairly successful. I know Tony's group is fairly successful at getting those issues corrected before we have to resort to this type of process.
Okay. So if you see they don't have a silt fence in and they're excavating, generally speaking, they put it in once they're cited for that.
Yeah, I would imagine, and
Okay.
now I don't go out on the soil and erosion control side, but what we would do on our side would be, we would say, hey, you've got an issue here, let's correct it. With soil and erosion, you can stop building inspection permits and other things. So I think we're far more effective in using those tools than we are notice of violations. But we had the notice of violation in there because there'll be an occasion that'll be the necessary form to get any action down the road. Those are a minority of the cases that we usually deal with across the board. And I would imagine Tony would tell you the same thing.
Thank you.
So again, kind of coupling two concepts. When we established the UDO, it's 435 pages, and we pushed all, and we meshed all these regulations together, or these different concepts of all these different ordinances together, cross-referencing them. We realized that in time we would find things that just didn't add up quite like we thought they would when we wrote the language initially. And so there's always going to need to be some clarification with these documents. We do it with standalone ordinances. This happens as well, because when you write, you can't conceive every type of question you might get. And sometimes you get questions, you go, wow, that's not as clear as we think it should be, or that doesn't quite match up the way we want it to. The UDO is no different. And so we've got some clarifications that we'd like to also have commissioners take a look at while we're doing this, mainly because we're already in the document doing a lot of work. These would just be some things to help clarify some of the additional issues. So we've got one in the beginning where we had a statement that the planning board had talked about and thought was a good idea previously. It did not make the final cut, which is of the original UDO, and that wasn't on purpose. That was just something that we thought would have in that document, which is to include a general provision that says graphics and images are simply for illustrative purposes. That the words of the ordinance, the text of the ordinance would actually be the item that would carry the weight. So we've added that back in as a suggestion. One of the bigger items for the board to consider, we'd like you to consider consolidating the Board of Adjustment and the Watershed Review Board and collapse that into the Planning Board. And here's why. In the 5 years I've been here, the Board of Adjustment and the Watershed Review Board has not met. So we've got two boards out there that are trying to find volunteers for that we're not going to, that isn't going to meet on a regular basis. But if we can collapse that into the Planning Board, which is already a board that's made up of representatives that come across the county, for the one or two times that the Board of Adjustment may need to meet, or the one or two times the Watershed Review Board may need to meet, we've instituted a process. And basically with an 11-member board, what we've talked about as the process is the 5 board members that are appointed by the 5 commissioners for the districts and commissioners district would sit as the primary 5 for the Watershed Review Board and the Board of Adjustment. The other 6 would be the alternates, just in case one or more of them could not be at that meeting. So you would always have the ability to have a 5-person board make those decisions. We believe that that is a consolidation that is worthy of the board's consideration. It will also help us with our staffing issues or volunteer finding to fill those boards and keep those functional. We also clarified the administrative review process of special use permit applications. The way that that's was initially written is that the idea that the staff would approve an application. That we say approve or approve with conditions or deny. The problem with that is it kind of gave folks the wrong impression that staff was approving or denying special use permits. And really we were talking about the application. So we've reoriented that section to really talk about, is the application complete or is it incomplete? And I think that's a better description of what staff is actually doing. We're in no way, shape, or form on these special use permits that are up to boards and committees and commissioners to decide. We're not, as staff, trying to make those determinations. What we're trying to do is determine that you have enough information to bring before the board based on what the ordinance asks you to bring. So we just made that clarification.
That's a question.
Yeah.
Did the planning board vote on to consolidate these two?
Yes.
And it was unanimous?
Yes.
Thank you.
So some other clarifications. We had definitions of major and minor subdivision. We had a slight variation between definition section and what was in the ordinance. We're clearing that up just to confirm that minor and major subdivisions are not just lots, they're also buildings or dwelling units. Clarify how text amendments are initiated, especially we want to clarify that. We want to clarify that the Board of Commissioners, our planning councils, planning boards, staff can all initiate text amendments without having to submit an application. That was a little bit fuzzy because what we say is you have to submit an application to create a text amendment, but the county's never had to submit an application to recommend that the board hasn't had to submit an application requesting the planning department to amend the ordinance. That would be something that you would just normally direct staff to look into, and we wanted to clarify that to make sure that was not problematic. We wanted to clarify some of the road design criteria, the subdivision regulations. We had a section of ordinance that just didn't translate well coming in from the subdivision section into the UDO. It just made you believe that private roads that were going to be done privately had to meet DOT standards, which doesn't make sense because the reason why you do a private road is because it wouldn't meet DOT standards. So we had to clean some of that up. That wasn't intended. We wanted to clarify the stream buffer requirements in the watershed. We had that in the subdivision section of when you build a subdivision, you have to stay off the buffer. What it wasn't clear on is that you still have to stay off the buffer if you're an individual lot. So you still have to stay out of the buffer. We clarified that, even though that's a rule we've continued to enforce. I think this next one is the item that one of the items that has caused, at least in the Cashers community, a lot of conversation and community discussion about how we move forward with growth and development over time. We have some graphics in our ordinance that were incorrect. I'll gloss over the bigger picture and then we'll talk about Cashers because that's one that's going to be a little bit different than the rest. But we have these older graphics that we used in the 441 and the Cashers district that were built over time that are really difficult for staff to update and maintain as the standards change in the text. And so what we've done is we've gone back in and proposed to replace those with tables, which are easier to manipulate. If you change the ordinance, you're able to change the text of the table easier than you are a graphic that's built on software using software that's older than what we have and we may not have access to. 441, we did this, and we tabled all the different things, all the different uses. And what we found is even prior to the current staff being here, they made some adjustments to the ordinance that never that were approved, but were never included into the actual graphic. Mainly, I think because they were never able to figure out how to change the graphic, so we've actually had to come back into the ordinance and make some adjustments to what was already approved that didn't make it into the UDO because they were never changed in the source document that we had. So there's a couple things there that are also included in that 441 district. But that just highlights the challenge that we have with working with some of these older graphics and why staff would recommend changing those to tables where we have more ability to make the changes as they come across more naturally. The Cashers district is where we found a lot of some of this information. We do have a graphic that, due to version control, was incorrectly, at least from staff's point of view, incorrectly identifies a maximum building size for our districts, which we've never really had. It incorrectly states we have a 5,000 square foot maximum building size. Where we trace that back, where the confusion came in is that we had a threshold for what required a special use permit was 5,000 square feet, but it got translated wrong, and so certainly that came up as we had a large development that entered Cashers, and we worked through some of that issue. There's still a lot of community interest in looking at maximum building sizes in Cashers. That conversation is still going on. The Cashers Planning Council would have been the only planning council that has a different recommendation for you than the other three bodies. The other three bodies recommended that the planning board, the Cully Planning Council, and 441 Planning Council recommended that you recommended approval of the amendments as proposed. Cashers, in going through that conversation, had some more concerns about the graphic in particular being changed. Community members shared that, where their recommendation was to only make the 160D changes and not make any of the additional changes. I'll tell you that from staff's perspective, our position has been the same throughout our process, which is it's an incorrect graphic. And we still have the same recommendation that we've always had, which is we are having these conversations with the community about what should be in the future, but doesn't necessarily change what we have today. I think where some of the community members have shared their feelings on this would, and I'm certainly no replacement for them, but from what we heard from those community members is that they would like to have something in place about a maximum building size or have that discussion come to its conclusion before we make the change. But I think there's still some issues and concerns that would, put forward to staff as we work with anybody in the future. I will note to the Board of Commissioners that even though there's never been a maximum building size in Cashers, every time you go through a special use permit process, and you guys have done this through cell towers mainly in what we brought to you, there's still standards that have to be approved. And one of the standards has always been in the Cashers ordinance for the approval of buildings that are now larger than 1,500 square feet is the trigger, is that the height, bulk, and size of the building fits the character of the community. So that's always been an evaluation that has to be made, but it's never been enumerated. And I think that's the conversation that we're having in Cashers right now is, how do we enumerate that? Should we enumerate that? What does that mean? And that conversation is ongoing, but that is part of the reason why I will report out to you that Cashers has a different recommendation than the other three appointed bodies that you guys will hear from, or that will be able.
So what did the planning board recommend?
The planning board recommended approving the entirety of the document, and as well as the other two planning councils.
So, but the planning board as a whole recommended that all these proposed changes be
Correct.
Correct. I do want to talk. I do want to spend a little bit of time on this graphic that we're talking about, because this has called a lot of attention, a lot of discussion in the Cashers community in regards to that. So I want to be real clear about where staff stands in regards to this graphic. Ultimately, there was a large development being proposed in Cashers in which there were a lot of opinions in regards to whether or not that development should be allowed. There's opinions pro and opinions against. Ultimately, what had occurred there was this graphic was pulled out as an example, as a reason why this development should be denied. What is the opinion of staff in regards to that graphic and the 5,000 and legal? What is the
I think for planning staff, and we made this clear during the hearing process where this issue was discussed, which is we believe the graphic to be an error. The text does not indicate a maximum building size. What it does indicate is a threshold a building size threshold that requires a special use permit. So at 1,500 square feet, if you have a building that's 1,501 square feet, you're going to have to get a special use permit, which goes through the process, which also includes the discussion about bulk size and conformity with community character.
So, for example, if that was enforced, there's a project being built currently right now. Is it the Boys and Girls? What size?
Right. So I think, yeah, I mean, if we would have played that out, the boys, it wouldn't have allowed for sizes like Boys and Girls Club or the Brookings, some of the ones that we've approved over time. Of course, the first one, the first big project that I think was approved with with these regulations was the rec center, which is somewhere around 25,000 square feet. So I think that we can go back and show you the history, and we can certainly do that of where these numbers have changed and how that got transposed incorrectly into the graphic.
So I really want to spend a little time on this because this is something that I know the community has been debating and discussing. So ultimately, when it comes back to that graphic, I do believe there's people who believe that if that graphic is not changed, if that 5,000 square foot limitation is left in there in a graphic in which staff and legal is saying is erroneous, it's not meant to be there. I do believe there's some people and community members in Cashers believes that would stop that development. Is that a correct? I mean, for that.
I think that would be something that.
And so the reason I want to point that out is I believe that would have basically stopped the development. So let me ask you in regards to right now we're playing this because that project that we're talking about that drove all of these conversations is either now been delayed or, I mean, as far as we know, been delayed.
I think as far as I know, that the project won't happen the way that it was originally envisioned.
Intended. And so ultimately, if it would have proceeded forward, okay, at this point, at any point, would staff have used this table to make a recommendation to deny this project? I mean,
so I think that was what was asked of us at the beginning of the process, and I think after consulting with Heather and the legal department and looking back at the history of this graphic and what was in place, we made a determination in-house, and this happens quite frequently that we're asked to make determinations on ordinances. We do it several times a day and hundreds of times a year. We made a determination that in fact that graphic is erroneous. The text of the ordinance, which is what we look at more heavily, is just the triggering mechanism is the only thing that we have regarding square footage. So we made that report out to the council. At the time of the hearing, the council agreed with staff's determination and they moved on. Now, eventually for a host of other reasons, the developer and applicant withdrew his application. So we never followed this process all the way through. So I don't know that, I wouldn't sit here today and say, hey, that would have been approved or that would have been not denied based on a myriad of different issues. We just wouldn't know because it got stopped shortly after we got through that determination process. If Heather, I don't know if there's anything that I've missed on that from your perspective.
On the process?
Yeah.
I mean, having a graphic like this that's an error, and it doesn't say 5,000 square feet, it says 5,000,
yeah.
and we don't know what that means, 5,000. We know where it came from, but it's incorrect. It's not the only thing that's incorrect on this graphic. There are 2, 3 other errors that are either old, out of date, or just wrong on the graphic, and it creates a potential liability. It doesn't do anything other than create a liability or a potential challenge for someone.
So it sounds to me pretty clear it needs to come off.
Yeah.
And that's where you see some of the recommendations. But again, I don't think that, and I wouldn't want to say that broad brushly that dismisses the concerns of the community. But we are working, and I think you'll hear more about this. But certainly we are looking at how how Cashers is developing. It is a growing community. We see that through the census numbers. It'll continue to grow, which will continue to put more pressure on the crossroads for services and development. So these. It's very true. Cashers is not the same place it was in 2003 when we initiated these ordinances. So how we move forward, we're currently moving in those discussions and how to move forward. And the council up there is working hard to do that.
and I do think long-term, there will be a future process in regards to just the codes and ordinances and rules and regulations. I believe that community will go through a process in the next 6 months to a year to really discuss those the codes and regulations, for lack of, I don't know if that's the correct terminology as far as how it goes into the UDO. But that is something that will be ongoing with that community. And I do believe there has to be a process, a community process to identify these things. There are groups of people who believe that nothing more than 5,000 square feet should be built in that area. But then there's a whole other community up there that they don't necessarily want to have uncontrolled growth, but they don't necessarily also believe there should be a line in the sand drawn in regards to how you make these determinations, meaning 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 square feet. That all that has to be or should be discussed and debated amongst the community. Eventually, the planning council is going to have to come together and make recommendations in regards to how these regulations may or may not need to be changed. And maybe there is a square footage conversation here, and maybe there's not, but there's a whole process that needs to take place in that community before we get to that point, which none of this really has anything to do with an erroneous table that creates a liability or graphic that creates a liability for Jackson County.
Well, I can speak for myself alone. And if we have an erroneous table and it creates liability, then it needs to come out as soon as we get it.
Absolutely. I think the only thing that unless there's other questions, that really gets down to the end of my presentation. We will get you out the red line if you'd like to look through the exact changes and how they're worded. We can certainly do that. I would recommend that the commissioners here, maybe as early as the next meeting, call for that public hearing on November 2nd, which would be the next night meeting that we would have the ability to advertise for this public hearing to consider these changes. So if that's that would just be a date I would throw out if that's amenable to the board.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So Stephanie's.
She's on there.
So the next item of discussion, we do have Ms. Stephanie Edwards, Executive Director of the Cashiers Area Chamber of Commerce, and we have Mr. Glenn Cupertino, I believe, is going to be coming up to discuss with the board. This is in regards to a program, Urban Land Institute project that the Chamber of Commerce and Cashiers is working on. Somewhat relates to some of the discussions that we just had. And I don't really want to step in front of Mr. Cupertino, but I believe you'll see how this does relate to what was just presented to you from Mr. Poston. And basically, in real simple terms, the chamber is trying to lead a project that would help the community to proceed forward in these types of discussions in regards to what are necessary codes and regulations for that community as a whole.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. Stephanie, do you want to say a few things? Kick it off, or would you like me to?
No, Glenn, I'll certainly defer to you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I have a COVID test later this afternoon because of inadvertent exposure. So didn't want to bring it to the commission, and I know it's in good hands with Glenn, but I am here to answer any questions afterwards if needed.
So thank you, and good to see you all. It's good to be down here with you. And I'll be brief, but we do have a unique opportunity in Cashiers to have ULI, the Urban Land Institute, come and do a panel for us. And we have, the chamber is really, as Don said, taking the lead and really plans on doing some heavy lifting in terms of getting this moving forward in terms of raising the money to fund it. It's not free. So, and the chamber's done a great job. We're 485 members strong, and I'm really proud of the work that our board and Stephanie have done. But we have there's a woman, Glenda Hood, who has had a home in Cashiers for over 30 years, her and her husband. She was the first female mayor of the city of Orlando and served as Secretary of State. So she's just a wonderful public servant, and is a wonderful lady who has offered help in terms of getting Urban Land Institute interested in coming to Cashers, because they don't just go anywhere. And she's been a great help to us. Anyway, we've had Don Eitler, who's the SVP of Urban Land Institute. He has traveled to Cashers. He is very interested in the project and helping, hopefully, the community, as Don said, come together in terms of, what the next step should be. And, land use experts. I do serve on the planning council as well, the Cashers Planning Council, and we're made up of a great group of people, but none of us are land use experts. None of us are traffic experts. And so we look forward to getting really an unbiased opinion from the Urban Land Institute, and really providing us a roadmap of really how to prioritize. And we've got to come up with, we have some ideas which I can run through you, but we're still in the process of coming up with the questions that we'll ask them to answer for us. So that's a little bit of the background. I don't know if you have any questions. I have a report here. ULI has been doing work like this since the 40s. And I know the planet, you all have, know who they are, and they have a great reputation. But I do have a book if you'd like to look through it. This was a panel that they did in Fort Worth, Texas, but they've done work all over the United States and really all over the world, for that matter. But they've done projects in Michigan and Colorado and all over the United States, and in some rural areas, although I believe Cashers is very unique. There's nothing quite like it anywhere, but they have done projects, similar situations and communities.
I don't have a question, but just maybe a comment. My academic background at Western Carolina was in land planning. I've spent my whole career in hospitality, but it's always helped me be a commissioner and look down the road and future projects. And this ULI is important to the community to give, because it has changed in 20 years, amazingly changed. It's totally different. And we have had similar community, I think 2013, we did a mountain area plan, and there's been some studies, but this is a really in-depth, accurate, to help look us in the future of southern Jackson County. And I know that I'm pleased to announce within the last hour, maybe a little hour and a half, and I thank you for your patience on being here. But the TDA, Tourism Development Authority, authorized today a $35,000 grant towards this project, just within the last hour. I think it'd be prudent for our board to show support with this project, and even maybe allow the county manager to come up with a dollar amount, unless you want to discuss that, then we can contribute to this program.
We are trying to raise, thank you, Mark, thank you. We are trying to raise $135,000. That's what we have to go under contract for with them. And we are about halfway there, which I'm excited. We've had widespread support. So we've had developers, we've had full-time residents, part-time residents, even Develop Cashers Responsibly, has contributed to this effort because they see the value in the unbiased, recommendations that we'll get. And that's really what we want, this to be transparent and unbiased. That's the key. And I think if we do that, it can help bring the community together.
And as TWASA builds their wastewater plant and potentially a future water source comes into that community, it's going to truly explode, and you'll need some guidance.
I agree.
Unbiased guidance, I
I
like
agree.
that word.
Yes.
I have a concern, just the word Urban Land Institute, even nothing in Cashers to me speaks of urban. And you said they've had some, experience with rural areas. I think one of the problems that I've seen historically when we've had people want to do projects in Jackson County is they come with ideas that have worked in urban areas or other states, but don't take into account the uniqueness of our area. And also the historical mountain citizen who has lived here for generations. And what can you say to me that would ensure that they're gonna take into account, not just the seasonal residents or the full-time residents, but the historically generational people that have lived in this Cashiers area?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good concern, and we've heard it before too. It's not the first time I've heard that, hey, it's Urban Land Institute, but they do, it's not just urban. More and more they're doing actually rural communities and have done quite a few of them of late in the last several years. The other thing that,
Do you know where they have done this?
Yes.
I'd like to know.
Eagle, Colorado, I want to say Petoskey, Michigan, very northern Michigan. These are small, very rural communities, but I can provide more information in terms of exactly which ones. But yeah, they've done a lot of work in rural communities. So it is not just an urban. And what the most important thing that they do when that panel comes here is they'll interview probably somewhere between 100 and 200 people. And we want to make sure that they're interviewing people who have lived here or have had families here for 100 years, and
Yeah.
they also want to take people from the education, from religion. They want to talk to leaders in the community. They don't want to hear from just a few people here or there. I mean, that's really probably the most critical part of the panel is how they gather that information. The other thing that the county will have to provide, and certainly the chamber has some information as well, but they're going to ask for all of the history. So the work that's been done 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they're going to get all of that information before they come here. And so that is all going to be used in determining, and again, the list of questions we provide to them is what they're going to answer. And also Tom, who would run the panel, he will pull, once he gets the list of questions, he has over 600 members that he can pull. So the fact that he's been here and has visited Cashiers, he'll try to get the right people as well. There's different disciplines. There's people that are experts in traffic and pedestrian movement. There's experts in land usage. So he'll pull the right people for the panel, which will be very unique and specific to Cashiers.
And it's truly a large cross-section of people who will be interviewed, from educators in multiple schools to medical professionals, law enforcement. It is a cross-section. And I will say, Commissioner Woody, if you've ever been to Cashiers in July, it's urban.
Well, the number of traffic on a 2-lane road might signify that, but this is 8-lane. The other thing is that I am in total support of planning and knowing that we desperately need this in the Cashiers area. How does this interface though with Vision Cashiers, who did lots of interviews, who did lots of planning, invested some money in planning? How does this play with that?
I think they would be, probably some of their members would probably be interviewed and would be involved in that respect in terms of this, but they're supportive of us, and ULI. They see the value in what they bring to the table in terms of being unbiased as well.
So they're involved
Excuse me,
as well.
I think
Commissioner Woody.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Edwards, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. If I may, I'll just add a couple of comments. Probably it would have been helpful if I had suggested in the beginning, Urban Land Institute, and you certainly hit the nail on the head. Urban kind of sticks out there as the first of the title, but it's a nonprofit organization that's been around since 1936. This advisory services panel program has been around since 1947. So they have this long-standing success of historical involvement across the board, not only in what would be considered more traditional urban destinations, but certainly in rural. And as Tom Eitler said when he was here addressing the Planning Council, particularly in second home communities, tourism destinations, they will look for alignment with the Cashers area, but he acknowledged and said part of the value is that Cashers is very unique. And so as Glenn mentioned, they'll bring together a customized panel of national experts that can share that expert analysis with us based on the issues that are identified. So I did want to mention that, and also to the degree that we talked about the process, we've emphasized throughout, I say we as the chamber, that this is intended to be a very inclusive, transparent process, as Glenn has mentioned before. And I'm very pleased to say that the support that we've received has been across the board, as he mentioned before. It's been from groups on all sides of the public policy debate. And we see that both in financial support as well as just general kind of academic support. So that's our commitment. 80 to 120 interviews will be held, confidential interviews. The panel will spend actually a week or more with us. They'll do a lot of advanced work, including, as Glenn mentioned, referring to previous efforts that have been made to help establish good growth management policies. So I did want you to know that this is, they do these panels across the United States and increasingly in Europe and in Asia, and we will be the beneficiary of just tremendous national resources that typically would not be available to us, particularly as an unincorporated area.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I think I too am supportive of this concept. I think more information you have, the better off you are in the long run, no matter what the topic is. And we never hurt by having more information and research and study. And I think this will be a topic that we can continue to talk about in the days ahead. It's exciting to hear the TDA make that announcement today, and it gives us an opportunity in the days and weeks ahead to talk about how can we partner with this endeavor, and gives us also an opportunity to research more about some of the other areas, the references of where they've worked and the successes that they have been able to list, and also to see the list of who's contributing and the partners that you're building, the partnerships you're building in the Cashers area. So I think it's an exciting endeavor. It's something that we look forward to in the weeks ahead to talk more about.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for listening, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
If I may just add one item, and that is to share the time frame, Glenn.
Please.
Because really time is of the essence with regard to fundraising and executing the contract moving forward, and then confirming the date on the calendar.
What is the timeline?
We are
No, he's.
No, we, I think she's muted on the end of that, but we are trying to have money raised and contract signed by the end of September. So we hope to try to get ULI, the panel here, in early November, or it may have to slide to, because of COVID issues that we're all facing, to sometime in early December of this year.
Well, our next business session will be on the 21st, so that'll be the next opportunity we would have to discuss.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank
All right,
you.
thank you all.
Thanks so much.
You ready?
Yes.
Next item, we have Ms. Baker up to discuss an amendment to a very old architectural services agreement that we had held with Court Architectural Services, or architectural firm, for a couple decades.
Yes. So in 2000, there was a master plan, I think, for the school system implemented, and they hired architect John Court. He had his own firm, Court Architect Services, or the actual name is on here, to do their architectural work. And they've used him since 2000 on everything in that master plan, and including the security updates that you've heard much about here recently. So this is an amendment to that 2000 contract that does a couple of things. John Court has now gone to work for McMillan, Pazin, and Smith. So it brings McMillan, Pazin, and Smith into this. And as you'll see here, Ron Smith has signed this as well as John Court, to say, you know, that John Court's now working with them, so they're going to complete this project under McMillan, Pazin, and Smith. But it also ends the contract. It says this is the last project under this contract. It serves as full accord and satisfaction of the 2000 contract, and this is the last item. And it helps Mr. Court wind down his business so that he can sign any releases with regard to the 2000 contract, and we can all move on from it. So that is the purpose, twofold purpose of this amendment. And I've worked on this with the school board attorneys to make sure we has in there what we both need in there.
Any questions?
After this project, we'll be able to select another architect.
They will be able
if we
to-
so choose.
To select on a project and they go through the normal process to select an architect.
So I'm recommending that the school board, traditionally what I've seen is school administration and school boards, what they do is they do their own request for qualifications process, and they go out and then they go through a selection process similar to what the county would do, but they would do it with obviously architectural firms who have experience in school systems themselves. I think it's important for the school board and school administration to take the leadership role in that selection process. And then ultimately, yes, they do work with the county as far as pay goes in regards to, obviously, in order to expend Articles 40 and 42 sales tax, it takes both the Jackson County and the Board of Education to agree on expending those funds. But at the end of the day, these are school projects. Traditionally, you go into other, this wasn't, I've never really seen a contract like this, to be honest. This was, generally speaking, if you look traditionally how around the state, standard practice is the school boards will go out and they will select the architectural firms and they'll go in contract with them. And then their relationship with the county commissioners is a financial relationship, meaning they obviously can't hire the architect without you as a board of commissioners providing the funding to do so. So I'm encouraging them to go out and start really investigating the world of architectural services and investigate those firms who have experience in K through 12 arena.
Questions? What's on the agenda?
Put it on the agenda.
Next item, 5.
Do we need to take a break or anything, Mr. Chairman? Or we good?
Let's take a recess then. Go outside.
It's so cold. I really check.
And come on. Pull in, Bobby. So sick of this fucking shit.
We're ready.
Yeah.
We'll go, come back to order.
Okay. Yes, sir. We're now to other business, and under A, I am wishing to discuss before the board, North Carolina General Statute 153A-92.
Is it gonna be as exciting as that other?
Oh, it's gonna be more exciting. Well, I did provide you a copy of the statute. And this statute, basically, what it does is it provides guidance and or rules associated on how pay is set, specifically for two elections that's coming up. And that's pay is set for sheriff and how the pay is set for the.
Oh, yeah, because they're not running.
This is her son, Brian.
Chairman, no, we'll go on.
Vice chairs. said go ahead.
No, should we wait on him?
I would prefer this to be an entire board conversation since we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and Ann Melton, I was surprised.
Can you hear me?
They've served well, both.
Yeah.
Served so well.
Hey, Tom, we're just pausing. The chairman had to step out real quick.
Wait over room, please.
Look at you.
What was that noise?
I can barely hear you, Tom.
What noise?
It sounded like one of Gail's chickens, just. Yeah, it's one of them dominators, sir.
Well, my chickens are doing well. They're laying and the eggs are delicious. Is that what he's talking about?
Yeah, these chickens.
You must have something to fix that.
I am. I'll just let you know, Commissioner Deeds gave me good advice on those chickens. They're growing.
Feed them, gather the eggs when they quit laying. Chop their heads off, eat
No.
them straight. as
Well,
that.
no, I've already named them. They're my pets.
Well,
Heather, now I go out there and they just come running to work.
Henrietta's gonna make dumplings.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
So the reason I put this on the agenda to discuss this statute specifically is about how pay is set for the sheriff and also for the register of deeds for this upcoming election. Basically, since we do know that, our current sheriff has chosen not to run again, I thought I'd go ahead and start publicly discussing these rules and regulations as different individuals decide whether or not they're going to try to file or not. So this will be the first of probably a couple conversations before we come back to you and ask you to pass a resolution as it relates to the pay for these two positions. So what I wanted to do is just provide everybody the statutes as it relates to this, and you can see compensation. You can see that under one there, B1, the Board of Commissioners may not reduce the salary, allowances, or other compensations paid to an officer elected by the people for the duties of his elected office if the reductions take effect during the term of the office. And then if you look at number 2, it states that during the year of a general election, the Board of Commissioners may reduce the salary, allowances, or other compensation of an officer to be elected at a general election only in accordance with this subdivision. The Board of Commissioners shall by resolution give notice of intention to make the reduction no later than 14 days before the last day for filing notice of candidacy for the office. So let me tell you what the purpose of this law is. A couple of things. One is the state legislature put this law into place so that basically politics doesn't come into play on how the salaries are truly set for an elected sheriff and for elected registered deeds. I.e., this does provide protection for those elected officers so that, 2 years into an elected officer or the elected sheriff's tenure, a board of commissioners can't just turn around and cut that person's salary in half. That's really the intention. But what it also does is it kind of restrains, I wouldn't say restrains, but it puts some specific rules for a board to have to follow if the board wishes to compensate a sheriff or a register of deeds in our normal system. So if you don't follow these rules, for example, then, and if you don't pass the resolution as described here, then a newly elected sheriff could argue that they are owed our current sheriff's salary. Okay. Now, maybe they have the experience to warrant that salary, or maybe, I don't believe you have to have any law enforcement experience to actually run for sheriff, or maybe they have no experience. So ultimately, I think it's the desire, I believe it would be the desire of Jackson County to basically pay these two positions appropriate salaries, and I think that would be the desire of me as a manager and you as an elected board, but we just need to follow the process and procedures so that we can do that. So really, if you look at that, that's just showing you the law itself. If you scroll down or go to the next couple of pages, what I've provided to the board is a couple items. This isn't new. I just wanted to show you that for the last two elections, you can see that I provided you the resolution that was adopted November 2017. And basically, if you look at that third whereas, it says, whereas the starting salary for the register of deeds position will be the minimum salary grade of 27 of the Jackson County classification and pay plan. The minimum salary is 27 is 45,507. Excuse me, to go up one more whereas, it basically is another paragraph that says, whereas the starting salary for the sheriff position will be minimum salary of grade 34, and the minimum salary would be 64,033. Now, I would like to scroll down to the next resolution because I'd like to start there. That was a resolution that when our current sheriff, that was adopted prior to when our current sheriff was elected. And if you see, it's basically doing the same thing. It's ultimately setting the salary for the sheriff and for the register of deeds at the minimum pay for that grade. So let's talk about what occurred with Sheriff Hall when he was elected, because I'd like to use that as an example to talk about how what we may be dealing with the new sheriff. We know a new sheriff will be elected. So
let me just interject there also. There is another important reason why we have to set that salary is because all elected positions in North Carolina require for you to pay a percentage of the salary as your filing fee. And so to be able to establish the accurate filing fee, then the state requires us to adopt this number.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. So ultimately, when you're sitting here looking at this resolution was passed the third day of February 2014, prior to our current sheriff being elected. When our current sheriff was elected, what had occurred was the current manager at the time, county manager at the time, was also the administrator of the pay plan for Jackson County. And what the current manager could do for the newly elected sheriff was follow the personnel policy. And what the personnel policy stated was the current sheriff, I believe, was chief deputy prior to becoming elected sheriff. And so he never lost service. He basically transitioned from chief deputy to becoming sheriff. And the way the policy was written at the time, when you get a promotion for pay's sake, when you received a promotion, you either went to the first step of that new grade or you got a 5% raise, whichever was greater. So at the time when Sheriff Hall was elected, the only thing that the manager, the pay administrator at that time could do was basically provide a 5% raise to the newly elected Sheriff Hall. Now, At that point, I believe it was several months later, there must have been some discussions at the time. I'm basing all this by going back and reading the minutes. There was several months later, I believe, it may have been in February sometime. You get elected in December, I believe it's somewhere in February. The Board of Commissioners at that time decided that Sheriff Hall had more experience than what he was being paid and chose to increase Sheriff Hall pay. And that's what occurred back when Sheriff Hall was elected. Okay, so I want to point this out to you because a couple of things that when this next election occurs, ultimately, it's going to be recommended that this board adopt a resolution setting the minimum pay, exactly like you've done in the past. And then ultimately, I, as county manager, is the administrator of our current pay plan, but the way our current rules read, we also have our finance officer and our human resources director involved in this conversation too. So what I've also included in this packet is our most recent pay policy. And what I wanted to do is the whole point of this conversation is I'm not only trying to inform the board, but I'm wanting the public to understand, and I'm also wanting the people who are potentially thinking about running for office to understand how this pay could be determined. So if we continue on, which I would recommend that we do, how we've done in the past, it's going to be recommended that the board within the next couple of months pass a resolution setting the minimum salaries for both the sheriff and the register of deeds based upon their current grade and the first step. I believe the sheriff's is around 65,000, and do we know what the register of deeds is?
46,417.
Okay. Now, you know, if ultimately if the register of deeds Joe Hamilton runs again and is victorious, then there is no break in service. Ultimately, his pay would stay the same. It doesn't go back to the minimum because that would just coincide with our current policy. Okay, I just want to let you know about the register of deeds. But when it comes to the newly elected sheriff, if we continue on and the manager is expected to administer the pay policy, the policy to be followed is going to be the policy that's in front of you right now. So I want to point out a couple key elements to this policy. One is I'm going to scroll down, first of all the way to the end of this policy and talk about promotion. Okay. If you recall, there's a couple of things. The point of this new policy was to help our county agencies, but also to help law enforcement, our sheriff's office, and other agencies to recruit. You know, that really is to recruit professional, skilled, qualified people, experienced people. But at the bottom, you can see this policy also deals with promotion. Okay. And within promotion, it says when a promotion occurs, the employee's salary shall be increased to the greater of 1, the minimum rate of the salary range assigned to the classification, which the employee is promoted to, or 2, adjusted to the career path step within the salary range assigned to the classification. So, for example, if we have existing employees in the sheriff's office who file and run for sheriff and then are ultimately elected as sheriff, then they potentially would move to the new grade at their current step. So if you're currently at a step 18 and all of your experience was at an 18 and you're a lieutenant, let's say for the sheriff's office, then you would move to the new grade at step 18. That is how all promotions are done. If you're currently at a step 7, okay, then ultimately you would be moved to a step 7 at the new grade. I want to point that out, but that is for existing employees only. Okay. Now, let's scroll back up here and talk about direct experience for law enforcement. The direct experience 1-to-1. So what I'd like to do is talk about, before I jump into that, I'm going to talk about people or citizens who are currently retired from law enforcement. Let's say they are currently retired from our sheriff's office, okay? And that they wish to run for election. And so right now, that is a break of service and is not considered a promotion. Okay? What that is considered is they run and become elected, then ultimately they will come in at the minimum salary. I would look at their experience. And if they have direct experience, then me as county manager can actually basically bring their salary up to step 12. I want to point that out because ultimately I am limited, according to this policy, to step 12 for people coming in. So what I mean by that is if there is a retired law enforcement officer that retired from the sheriff's office that has 30 years of experience, 25 years of experience, me as manager can only increase their salary to step 12. Anything above that has to come back before this board for a decision. Is that? I'm trying to get all this on record just so for everybody to understand. And then ultimately, if let's just say a retired highway state patrolman that's not currently working for Jackson County, I'm trying to come out with different examples because there's all sorts of people that could potentially run for this office. But let's just say instead of a highway state patrolman, you're a retired law enforcement that ultimately retired from another agency. Again, I'm going to go back and look at these different policies, and then I will apply them to my best that I can. But at the end of the day, my authority maximizes at step 12. And anything above step 12, it's up to the Board of Commissioners to decide whether or not that candidate who's elected warrants higher than step 12. I missing anything? I'm trying to, I want to make sure.
For the sheriff at grade 34, step 12 would be $81,209.
81,000.
And that's a max that would be authorized.
So, and that's under our current policy. And what I'll also tell people, that's under the policy. That's afforded, the authority is afforded by this board to me. Now, and I'm not saying you're looking to do that, but if that authority gets removed from me, then ultimately it comes back to the Board of Commissioners. But as of right now, if we follow standard procedure of how it's been done in the past, if right now it's going to be recommended commissioners adopt a resolution setting the minimum salaries for both of those positions, and then whoever becomes elected, I'm telling you, as manager and administrator of our pay plan, I will utilize this policy to attempt to determine the salary of the sheriff, and ultimately maximum from my authority to be step 12.
We got it.
This is as much for me as it is for you.
Oh, you got it too.
Yeah. Any questions or any?
You could choose a step lower than 12 if the experience merited that, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to follow this. I'm going to do my best to follow this policy. So for example, that I was given, if you had, remember, there's a way to apply indirect experience to this conversation, and indirect experience is 25% of your years of service. So if it's an indirect experience conversation, then ultimately it would be probably less than 12 steps.
And you would work with the director of human resource and Ms. Fox on your recommendation?
Yeah, so currently.
So if a fellow ran for sheriff and he wanted to know how much he's gonna make if he won the election, he'd just have to come sit down and talk to you.
Well, what we'll do is I'll show them the resolution that you passed, basically stating what the minimum is, and that's what he's guaranteed to make. And then ultimately, they can discuss it with me, and what I'll do is best I can, but I have to be careful with that conversation because I have to verify their information before I commit to any pay. The reality is the reason I take this information, the reason we have their input, first of all, but also a reason we have human resources and finance involved in these conversations is they go and verify their years of service and retirement system. They go and verify, if somebody comes and says, I've got 20 years of law enforcement experience. Well, that needs to be verified before I come back and make a decision. So, yes, they can discuss it with me, boys, but I'll be very cautious on that in regards to how I respond to them, because I have to make sure that the information they're telling me is verified.
Right.
So look for, I'll probably at the work session in October, bring the proposed resolution back to the board, and if the board is okay with it, it's basically gonna be these resolutions with the minimum salaries. I'll look to request for the board to adopt it in November, the third meeting in November.
Okay.
So the next item of discussion is in regards to the American Rescue Plan Act. Just wanted to provide a couple updates, not reading this verbatim. This is fairly the same information I provided to you before. First paragraph just gives a little bit of information on the amount of money that Jackson County is going to be received. Just a reminder, these funds have to be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and they have to be expended by December 31st, 2026. Ultimately, what I do also is I basically list out the 4 categories in which these funds can be expended. That's to respond to public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. 2, to respond to workers performing essential work. 3, for provision of government service extent the reduction in revenue. And then 4, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Same information you've received before, just updating where we're at. It's recommended Jackson County initiate several processes, move forward with ARPA planning and eventual expenditures. A couple things to note, on the front end of this, before we start going through this, it is recommended that none of these expenditures take place until the final rules come out on these funds. That's being recommended by the Association of County Commissioners and all the people that's being given advice to both Darlene and I. Darlene, when is that supposed to?
It's any time.
Yeah.
It should have already been done.
So we're
Well,
hoping.
that's what they
Within the
told us
next
at
2
the state meeting.
So assuming that all the rules stay in place, just now, I'm just summarizing at this point. If you look at 1, moving forward, human services functions, just want to remind the board that we do have if you look at under A, we do have a grant application into Dogwood in the amount of $2,174,497. Our intent is to match that with ARPA funds to help build a Center for Domestic Peace shelter. Also included in that is planning for the homeless shelter involved in these conversations. That's the 62.5 from Dogwood and 62.5 from ARPA. Dogwood announced their grant awards by the end of this month. The next item, just a reminder to the board, is that Wake is still working on their putting together requests regarding their administrative facility needs. They're in need of facility repairs and expansion. Number 2, I'd ask for us to focus on. It's not necessarily, obviously, no decisions today, but just bringing this back up. It's requested that the Board of Commissioners consider expending up to $1,315,024 over the next 5 years to fund the sheriff's request for in-car video, body camera, and taser system. Again, these expenditures not take place until we get it verified, get the final rules and all of that. But this there's language in the interim rules that allow for certain public safety upgrades. So you can't supplant some safety issues, but you can do upgrades to service the citizens. And so since that language is in there, this is something that was discussed with the board at budget time. So I thought I'd go ahead and put it in the summary here. Number 3.
Before you move too much further down the list, go back up to a Wake.
Yes, sir.
Because I want to clarify and make sure I am understanding correctly. It says they're putting together requests regarding facility needs. They need repairs and expansion. Now, the conversation that I had with their director at one point, and I encouraged that we go through this process, was more geared towards the acquisition of the facility that they're
Right.
in, not expansion.
Yeah, they figured out potentially another means for that.
So they've taken care of that aspect.
That they're working where they are.
I can give you as much of an update as you want. They, Mr. Hare has graciously decided to give them the building and to spread that over and to spread that so that it works through his IRA. So they are just left with significant repairs that need to be made to the building, so that's. what
Okay,
it is.
because I know the original conversation I had with Renee was that
Yeah.
they needed to purchase,
That's what I heard.
and that's why I encouraged her to have a conversation with you. I didn't see that. I didn't.
So
That's
it's
great news to hear. I'm very appreciative of what Mr. Harris done.
Isn't that?
So as they proceed forward and get that deal done, they can get their estimates for renovation. When I say renovation, it is renovation, and maybe a little bit of expand. I'm using both those words to give the most flexibility in
Correct.
that conversation. So jumping back down to number 3, at one point I talked about coming back to you with a nonprofit application. I actually have a draft that's sitting on my desk right now. But the reality is we really do need the final rules to come out.
Yes.
I really do need to understand those rules and how they will be applied to the nonprofits. They just came out, for example, within maybe the last week or two, that they are looking at using the Office of Management Budget guidelines for procurement and contracting. I knew there would be some rules associated with these funds. And so ultimately, when you start looking at those rules, that starts getting into procurement rules, it's significant. And so I need to better understand that before we just open this up to nonprofits. It would be easy to just tell them that they're responsible for following these rules, but that doesn't really empower them. We need to be able to educate them what the rules are going to be so that we don't find ourselves in a position 5 years from now about having to recoup monies from these nonprofits.
Yes.
And so I need more time and need more guidance before I can finish out that nonprofit application process. Obviously, 4, continue workforce affordable housing discussions. 5 is to receive input and direction from the board. So really, I just wanted to update the board to let you know where we're at, but specifically on the nonprofit applications too, because the last conversation we had, I was going to be coming to you with that application process. And that's just going to have to be delayed until we have more information.
And a couple of them have reached out to me and asked when that process would start. And I told them we were waiting for specific guidelines from the government on our requirements.
See, exactly. And the
So I said that.
guidelines, if you want to share a little more, I don't want to say, we don't know until the final rules come out, but I wouldn't imagine they're just going to be a complete overhaul of the rules as far as what's allowable expenses. I'd say they're going to tweak that. The dropping of using the Office of Management Budget procurement guidelines, that's big. That is, everybody joked that those guideline interim rules are 140 something pages. But you should go read the procurement guidelines for the federal government. That becomes very complex very quickly. So we just need time to catch up on those rules. And Mr. Chairman, that's all that I have. We do have closed session today under legal and real property, but other than that, that's all I have.
I know Commissioner Striblin is having some difficulties, some technical difficulties. He is listening to us. He's having some difficulty being able to communicate with us, to speak to us. I'll give him an opportunity if he has an outstanding issue, something under other business that he would like for us to discuss. If he wants to call me on my personal cell phone, I'll be able to relay that to the board and make sure that he's heard here during this part of the meeting. And while he's having a chance to send me a message or not, I'll start with Commissioner Deeds. Are there any other items of business that you want to bring up? Any other business? Commissioner Woody, is there anything else that you would want, outstanding that you want to talk about?
We had an emergency Board of Health meeting Monday,
Okay.
last night. It was through Zoom. And they did request that I ask if we could think of a possible location or venue for a vendor who would come in and set up, and this would be at no cost to us, for testing and vaccine. They're getting a lot of requests for testing because some of the agencies are requiring if you aren't vaccinated, you must be tested weekly and that kind of thing, and it's become a burden on the staff. So one thing that came up was using the United Methodist Church, First United Methodist in Silva, their gym, and two of the Board of Health members are also members of that congregation, and Jerry Louise mentioned that as a possibility. But because they have the preschool there in the morning and then some uses in the afternoon, they asked me to just throw that out. They cannot use the senior center like they did before because the senior center is now fully open and operational. So if there was another location, the requirements are bathroom and power. They set up their tent, they bring in their staff, and they do this.
Okay.
So,
We'll just charge staff with thinking about that and
yeah,
work with Ms. Caraway to
the
see if there's
armory was brought up as a possibility, not knowing if that was. But I won't take time to give, but there was some, if anyone has questions about the giving boosters and all that, there, that was the main purpose of our meeting, and an update on the flu clinic. But I can give that later if anyone's interested. Won't take time.
Commissioner Jones, do you have any other items? And I don't have either. Commissioner Scribbling, if you have something else, just text me. And I do know that we have a need for closed session. And that is under real property. Is that correct, Mr. Evans?
And legal.
And legal. Okay, so do I have a motion to go into closed session concerning those two items?
I move we do so.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
We'll give them a chance to get the technology turned off.